Hello and welcome back to Talking Giants. Today is January 22nd, 2026, and we had Ian O'Connor on, columnist at The Athletic, six-time New York Times bestselling author, and he, of course, has been on top of everything John Harbaugh from start to finish, so I wanted to kind of get him on after the fact to tell the full story. We talked about the power structure, talked about how he kind of landed here, John Mara being a lion and a titan throughout the entire thing too. Be the Giants, talked about that phrase too. So really appreciate Ian O'Connor for coming on, and I think you're going to enjoy. Had like a 45-minute conversation. But before we get to that, John Harbaugh at his presser on Tuesday, want to talk a little bit about that. It was cool. It was just cool to see him in Giants colors, cool to see the Giants pin on him, cool to see the Giants background. Like it's real. John Harbaugh is the coach of the New York Football Giants. Yeah, and he kind of started off with that too. Bring back the New York Football Giants. And the people over the years, like, you know, people on the internet, that you're real, but you're not real. Why are you saying the New York Football? I would get that critique of, why do you say the full thing? I don't know why I say the full thing, because John Harbaugh wants me to say the full thing. And I've been saying it for years, and I'm glad that John Harbaugh is going to bring that back. He's like, hey, my father Jack, that's what we've always called them, the New York Football Giants. Let's go, man. Bring that back. Bring that back. It's always been a part of my life, hearing stories from my father about the 80s and the 90s Giants and the real glory days and things like that. Bring that back. Let's do it. But basically from the start, he set an expectation for earning the right to win and play for a championship. The standard has been raised with John Harbaugh, which is awesome. That was basically immediately, even from the stuff that Ian O'Connor's been putting out, but even from what he said during the presser. And I kind of even like, too, that he used the opportunity to almost have this. I almost count this as like the first address to the players. It's not just, he wasn't just addressing the people in the room. He wasn't just addressing the fans, the media. I thought he kind of used that as like, this is my first address to the team. Because the quote that I love the most is, if you don't love football, you're not going to love it here. Fall in love with the grind and the work that comes with being great. Even at one point, there were a couple times where he talked to Joe Schoen too. Ain't that right, Joe? A couple times where he talked to Joe Schoen, and he's like, listen, Joe, if there are guys here that don't love football and they don't love the process of it, we're going to ask them to go play for somebody else. Blah. Yes. We love football. We want our football players to love football. We want our football players to love playing for the New York Football Giants. So I love that is going to be the standard, even more than talent, even more than traits, which this just does make sense, right? I know you want to bet on traits. I know you want to, even if somebody isn't the most perfectly clean-cut, polished prospect, you want to take a chance on traits, right? In the draft or even free agency. We're gonna get back to that period of time where this person was really, really good at ball, right? But if they don't love football, if they're not going to grind their ass off, if they're not going to work every day to get better, then odds are they're not going to work every day to be better for you. That standard is now here as well. He downplayed the power structure being important. The power structure of GM and head coach are both reporting to owner. We all work for the boss, and John Mara is leading football operations. You're going to hear me and Ian even joke about that too. And we're going to be like, yeah, well, he downplayed the importance of the structure, but it took 3 days for them to figure it out. So I think it is kind of important, but that's what he did in the presser. Yeah, man. And that's basically it. And Joe Schoen kind of had like a panic attack, which I feel kind of bad for him on a human level, but he kind of had a moment trying to introduce John Harbaugh. I think he may be afraid of him. I think he may be petrified about him. He talked about how he likes the tape and how he's excited to coach these guys, especially Jackson Dart too. He kind of differentiated. He's like, I don't love the roster. And that's not saying he hates the roster, but I think he differentiated. The tape is the truth teller. That's what we're going to live and die by, is the tape. He likes the tape, that what they showed. And I like it too, if John Harbaugh likes it too, even though they won 4 games. All right. I also want to talk about, before we throw it to Ian, even more than like this person being just breaking a glass ceiling. This is officially John Harbaugh's first coaching hire on his staff. Megan Rosberg assists the head coach John Harbaugh in all areas. This is what she did in Baltimore. Assists head coach John Harbaugh in all areas, including football operations, scheduling, communications, and staff management. And then additionally, what she's done over the last couple of years is she's taken on more with the defense. Worked with the defensive line and outside linebackers for the past 4 seasons, officially adding defensive assistant to her title in 2024. If I had to guess, Megan Rosberg, and this isn't just simply because Brian Dable also had a woman that was kind of like the right-hand person for him. This feels like Megan Rosberg is what Laura Young was for Brian Dable, except it seems like she has a specific niche area of working with the defensive line and outside linebackers, which I don't necessarily think Laura Young, did she really work with the tight ends? I don't necessarily know if Laura Young had like a specific like niche position that she would work with. Mike McDonald, former defense coordinator for the Ravens. There's a really good Athletic article. You should go read it. Here's what Mike McDonald had to say about her. Her superpower is to generate those relationships. The players can feel how genuine and authentic she is and how much she cares about where they're coming from to be able to relate. What I love too, again, in the Athletic article about her, she was tasked with kind of like firing up the defense before a game against the Cleveland Browns. This was like her first time like addressing the team and like a group of people, a locker room, I should say. Every good story needs a villain, she shouted. And then the next day, the Ravens defensive line dominated the Browns in a 28-3 game the following day. And the message became their rallying cry. All the guys on the sideline were repeating her line. That stuck with us for a while, a player said. Rosberg is in her early 30s. As of 2024, 12 full-time female coaches in the NFL. At the end of the day, it's all about the players, she said. Whether you're a female coach or a male coach, your resume is what they do on tape. Sound familiar to John Harbaugh's initial press conference? If you give the players information or give them an advantage to help them win on Sunday, they will trust you, and they're going to respect you. If you're genuine and you do the things that will help them win and help them prolong their career, it doesn't matter what you look like. If you're real with them and you help them, they'll trust you as their coach. Her father, Jerry Rosberg, was a longtime special teams coordinator with the Ravens from 2008 to 2018. Jerry retired in 2022. Daughter was always curious about practice and kind of the workings of football organizations, so they talked about it. But she played youth flag football. Eventually, she went into volleyball, played collegiately at American University, where she captained her team to the NCAA Sweet 16. Then she wound up taking a corporate job in Detroit, Michigan after graduating in 2014, but she wanted the communal feeling and competitive nature of sports. Mike McDonald also goes on to say, this is Anthony Weaver. Anthony Weaver, a Giants defensive coordinator candidate. As her confidence grows and her knowledge of the game grows in terms of schematics, I don't think it's unreasonable to see her growing into a position coach or maybe even one day being a coordinator. You talk about someone that's capable of breaking glass ceilings. If I was going to bet on somebody, I'd have no problem betting money on her. So this is cool. I don't know, man. Like, it's cool integrating, females into the coaching space that are actually qualified. It's cool kind of breaking glass ceilings. And regardless of like the doing that, this is John Harbaugh's first official coaching hire. And I would like to remember this. Megan Rosberg, assisting John Harbaugh in all areas, including football operations, scheduling, communications, staff management, and you're working with the defensive line. Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, meet Megan Rosberg. Michael Pierce and Jadeveon Clowney were particularly very close with our former Ravens players. So, all right, there you go. That's some of the news. That's presser. That's John Harbaugh's first hire. And now here's Ian O'Connor. But before we get to Ian O'Connor, I got to talk to you about the DraftKings Sportsbook. DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, makes every playoff moment feel bigger. DraftKings has your back with early exit protection. If the player in your eligible NFL prop bet goes down at any point in the first half, you still get paid in cash. Here's the best part. New customers bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code JAMFootball. That's code JAMFootball to turn $5 into $300 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Now here's Ian O'Connor. All right, welcome back to the show, and I want to welcome on for the first time Ian O'Connor, columnist at The Athletic, 6-time New York Times bestselling author. Ian, I want to first off thank you for coming on. Second of all, I feel like there's been 2 times over the last 5-6 years that us as a Giants fan base have put up the bat signal of trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And I even remember going back to like 2021, 2022, you kind of like coming out of nowhere and just be like, this is what's going on. And we're like, oh my God, this is great. I'm happy to know what's going on. And especially right now, you've been kind of like our Batman. We've put up the bat signal. What's going on? You've come in, you've reported on everything. And I even want to thank you I'm fascinated, obviously, not just by your presence and what you're reporting on, but I feel like people are also fascinated by Batman himself too, and want to know like who he is and what how you've been able to establish these connections. So thank you for coming on and thank you for joining me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Justin. Thanks for having me. And if the people who really knew me heard that somebody was comparing me to Batman, they would have a pretty good laugh over that, or any superhero of any sort that you would throw out there. So I guess I'd have to explain my job first. And sometimes I'm a full-time author, other times I'm a full-time columnist. And when you're a columnist, or at least a general columnist, I'm going from the Yankees to the Knicks, to the Giants, to the Jets, to the Mets, and then doing national stuff as well. So my job now at The Athletic, it's sort of a 50-50 split, 50% national, 50% New York. Obviously, I've been doing sports in New York for 40 years, so sometimes it'll tilt that way. And so I'm done with the Yankees, columnizing on them second, third week in October. Their fan base isn't too happy about that. They think it always should go deeper than that, and maybe rightfully so. So by the time I'm done with the Yankees playoff run, however long it goes, I turn to the Giants, and they're already out of it. And it's been unbelievable. Like by Halloween, every year, the Giants are out of it. Now, I covered the 2 Super Bowl runs in 07 and 11 as a columnist. The 08 team, which better than the 2 Super Bowl teams. And so to me, those were the days. It was really fascinating and interesting to cover the Giants on a daily basis. And they were always relevant, playing meaningful games in December all the time. And the last 14 years, it's been the opposite of that. So I haven't been around all that much, other than coaching searches and a GM search maybe. And if they have a couple of big games, maybe I'll be there writing a column. But they haven't been successful enough to draw my consistent attention like they did with Coughlin and Eli when I was around a lot more. So that might explain why I'm coming out of left field for coaching searches, because there's nothing else relevant going on with this franchise. And I think they finally got this one right to the nth degree. So my suspicion is going forward, particularly if I write a book about the Giants at some point here, I'll be around a lot more, and it won't feel like I'm Batman swooping in.
Yeah. I love it, man. And this does deserve a book. That was literally going to be my next question. This does deserve a book. I was even putting that out there and thinking about it before he was hired. Like the morning he was hired, I talked to Gary Myers, and I'm like both of you, I feel like both of you guys can write a book on this. And especially if the Giants ever have, even if it's an 11 to 12 win season, let alone if they win a playoff game or two, or knock on wood, they win the whole thing. It has the setup.
Let me say this: I think they have to win the whole thing for that book to work.
Okay,
because I think New Yorkers, the way they're wired, is the happy ending has to be a championship. It can't be losing in the NFC Championship game with a surprise run. You have to have a trophy at the end of that book. That's what.
I guess if you want a bestseller, right? Because even I'm sitting here myself, like after covering how many 4, 5, 6 win seasons, since 2019, I've been kind of doing this. Like, oh my, I would be so thankful for a 12 win. Like that would feel like the ultimate for me. So kind of the first question for you in this book, what is chapter 1? What is page 1? Where does this all begin in your opinion?
Right now, as we sit here today, or are we talking about them winning the Super Bowl? Because what you would do if that happened, right, at the end of
this Harbaugh story, Harbaugh story, where does it begin?
I think it would be the way I construct my books is you want to be in the present tense. So I would have a scene in the locker room, Harbaugh alone with Jackson Dart, whispering to each other with the Lombardi Trophy nearby. You want to start with a scene like that to bring in the reader. And then chapter 1 is maybe the moment Steve Bisciotti calls him on the phone saying you're fired. And first of all, I don't care how that owner wants to spin it. You do not do that on the phone for a Hall of Fame level coach under any circumstances. And by the way, I haven't heard that from Harbaugh himself. That's just my opinion covering sports for 40 years. You call him back, and I know Bisciotti said he didn't want to make it uncomfortable, be awkward to call him back into the office and then fire him. I'm sorry, you just cannot wait a day then. Tell him tomorrow when he comes into the office. You don't call him on the phone and say after 18 years, a Super Bowl ring, 13 postseason victories, and 180 regular season victories, I'm firing you on the phone. That's just ridiculous. So, but I think that's where it starts. And the Giants were on top of him right away. So right away, you're getting into the pursuit. Joe Schoen, I think, called the agent like 3 times in the first 90 minutes after John got fired. It was something like that. The Giants had done their homework on Harbaugh before he got fired. John himself, before the last game, might have been even before the penultimate game of the regular season, he had talked to somebody about, okay, if I get fired, what are we looking at here? And they had 6 or 7 teams that they thought would have openings. The Giants were number 1. That was before he got fired. So that never changed. And I did a golf leaderboard as a bit of a joke on Twitter or X, where I had the Giants at -7 and the Falcons and the Titans at -6 or -5. And really, I thought in my heart, it was -9 down to -5 or -4. I really thought the Giants right out of the gate were way out in front, and they deserve credit, Chris Mara and Joe Schoen, for really pouncing as soon as he got fired. I think that I took my first conversation with him by phone was 2 days after he was fired, and already he sounded like the head coach of the Giants. He actually said "we" once, talking about the Giants, and he said, "I think this is the job." Now, some of it at the time he didn't want printed right away, but it was clear to me he was already picturing himself in Giants colors, leading that team out of the tunnel. The New York Football Giants, he was saying that. I knew his family, being a real football family, his dad, of course, a lifer coach, had a great appreciation for the history of the league. And it's just being the head coach of the Tennessee Titans versus being the head coach of the New York Giants.
Right.
I know we're probably biased because we're in this area, but I'm sorry, there is a difference. And I think he felt every bit of that.
Yeah. Especially because the Falcons and the Titans were the other 2 teams. And this is no offense to them, right? But you're talking about the New York Football Giants and then the Falcons and the Titans competing for a coach with this background, this resume, and has this amount of success, right? So the phrase that I said time and time again during this process about landing Harbaugh is be the Giants. Go be the storied franchise that flexes your resources, that flexes your history, that you can flex the Mara family tradition and so on. Tell me how they did that in your eyes.
Well, they didn't have to because he already knew it. That was the beauty of this chase, is that they didn't have to sell that because Harbaugh and his father was like, I had a line the other day in my piece. I know I tweeted it. I think it was in one of my columns where I said his father told him, "You're nuts if you don't." He didn't use the word nuts, but basically he said, "You are nuts if you don't take this job." Because it's the New York Football Giants and you don't pick the Titans or the Falcons or the Browns or even the Miami Dolphins, who have their own place in NFL history, of course, in the Shula years. But it's the Giants, and that's the job. And it's not just about what you're seeing on tape. And listen, they were 4-13 for a reason. So I did ask Harbaugh yesterday when he watched the tape, yeah, you love Dart, you love some other pieces, but did you see why they were 4-13 too? And he deflected on that, on his answer. But I think the reason they got this done is because they didn't have to convince him that the Giants were different. The entire Harbaugh family already knew that. Yep. So that's why he's the head coach today. You didn't really get the sense that, now obviously, I mean, resources them paying him $20 million, what's being reported $20 million a year, and maybe allowing to have a staff, like the budget for his staff seems to be more than maybe even any other NFL team. That's what I kind of mean by resources. So you don't get the sense that like the Giants flexing that kind of financial backing or any other kind of resources that they can invest in the building, that was part of a sweetener that made the job that more enticing for a guy like Harbaugh. Yeah, I think that's fair to say, Justin. But I would say that any organization that hired him was going to provide that.
Yeah.
I would say that the Giants, being perceived as such an old school organization in the Mara family for more than 100 years, that they would be more resistant to change and those sorts of things that John wanted to do and get bigger operationally and maybe have more control over other departments than the head coach ever had before in that organization. The Giants showing the willingness to assure him he would have that. I think, those are sweeteners. But anywhere he went, he was going to get 20 million, maybe plus, and have resources to pay assistants and have some control over, a lot of control over the roster and reporting directly to the owner because he had that in Baltimore. Why would he surrender that after 18 Hall of Fame level seasons? So,
right.
Yeah, the Giants did move, though, and Chris Mara confirmed to me what I had already written at the press conference. He said that it was Saturday when John, his brother, decided, okay, for the first time, we'll have a head coach not report to the GM, but report to ownership, and that clinched the deal. And I thought it was important. They had John Mara make the phone call to John Harbaugh. It wasn't Steve Tisch. It wasn't Chris Mara. Mm-hmm. And it was almost a symbolic thing, like the person running the franchise who has done it for a long time, going through a very personal health crisis right now. He's the one who needs to make this phone call, and that's the way it played out.
Yeah, I want to put a pin on. I do want to ask you about the reporting structure, and then you wrote the impactful words of impacting the entire operation. So I do want to put a pin on that. But you talk about John Mara, and I want to talk about him and give him his flowers in this process, because I think between seeing him post game after the Dallas win, and then pictures you saw at the press conference yesterday, like, it's clear that Mara is going through it with his cancer right now, especially physically. And I can't even imagine where he is right now, both physically and emotionally too. Emotionally, I can imagine this had to be a draining. I mean, running a team that has struggled this much, and I know he cares about it, I can only imagine how emotionally draining that is, and then on top of your health. But trying to understand his situation, talk to me about his strength through this process and how much of a titan he kind of was through it.
Yeah, he was and is a lion of the NFL. He really is. And I think the respect that Harbaugh had for him going into the process was big here too, because of their dealings on the competition committee and the way John carries himself around the league. He might be the most respected owner there is, even though his team has failed for 14 years. It's amazing. I think just getting into the office with his treatments and sitting in on the interviews, being fully engaged, getting on the phone with Harbaugh and his agent. And I don't know how the man did it. And it's been tough. Many of us have known that for weeks, months. And I just think he has shown incredible strength, courage, and fighting a very serious disease here. And yeah, we saw some photos yesterday. I saw him after the Green Bay game near the elevator. And I will say this too, certainly none of us are looking for any kind of medal here, but I think the media has shown a lot of respect for him. And he asked for privacy. I think we've granted it, and he deserves it. And he's always treated us with respect. And it hasn't always been wine and roses. Like he was mad at me for a long time for a column I wrote. And so, but that's when you're a columnist in New York, you're going to have that, even with people that you really respect and have good relationships with. If you're not pissing off people at times, you're not doing your job. So, but he was incredible in this process. Just, Chris had to go down to Baltimore and do the meeting there. And then he went also, I don't know if it was Philly or Delaware, wherever they had that second meeting on Friday. Chris had to do that because John physically couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. And Chris really stepped up. But at the end of the day, for John to fight through and be there pretty much for every interview, and it was amazing. It really was. And the people that are in the building, just if you can respect that man even more, you do today.
Is there any kind of, I don't even know if this is behind the scenes, but is there any kind of story example like through this? Like, obviously knowing his strength and knowing that he was present, but what was specifically kind of his role in getting Harbaugh here, Harbaugh buying into this structure despite the recent results? So what was kind of John's role in that, if that kind of makes sense? Yeah.
And so Chris Mara told me that this deal was done in a conversation between Mara and Harbaugh. He said John and John closed this deal. So before that official phone call to say, congratulations, you're now the head coach of the New York Giants, there was a conversation on the phone between Mara and Harbaugh that closed the deal essentially. And he also was there, of course, for the Wednesday visit. How long he was there, I don't know. Mm-hmm. And I think Paul Schwartz in the Post had a story about how he moved around his treatments to make sure that he could sit in on all the in-person interviews. Again, an amazing thing to do. So did The only time I believe he sat with him in person was the Wednesday meeting when Harbaugh was there basically all day. He didn't go to the dinner afterward. And I know there was a phone conversation with John Mara, with Tim McDonald, and I believe Chris Mara with the agent, Brian Harlan. That was pretty important. So John did everything he could. Again, was he there as many hours as he would have been if he were completely healthy? No. I think there probably was a day or two in the process where he wasn't in the building, but not a day where there was an in-person candidate there. So, yeah. But beyond that, I would have to say I don't have specific details, except the ones I gave you. And I think that the candidates, from what I understand going in there, was just so impressed by the fact that he could sit there and participate in the interview, just given what he was dealing with, which, of course, physically, when you see him, you could tell it's been a monumental struggle, and he's been a complete lion through the whole thing.
Tell me about Chris Mara, because he's somebody that the fan base that we have talked so much about without knowing fully what he does. And I'm asking this out of pure curiosity. What does Chris Mara do?
So the fan base has been asking that question for how long, right? Since 2011. Nobody cared when they were winning Super Bowls.
Right.
I know Chris, by the way, was instrumental in helping Accorsi do the Eli Manning deal. Chris Mara also was a big proponent of drafting Ahmad Bradshaw. And for fans of a certain age, they're like, well, I don't even know about that. But those moves did help the Giants win 2 Super Bowls, and that's always lost in the discussion about Chris Mara. A little more history on him. He left the organization, went out, ran his own scouting service, became the GM of the New Jersey Arena League team to prove himself outside the family business, to become the general manager of the Giants. When Accorsi retires after the 2006 season, Chris Mara thinks he's getting the job. I've proven myself outside the family business, and he doesn't get the job because Steve Tisch blocked it. Tisch didn't want any part of a Mara running football operations. I don't blame him because he's unfireable then, right? So Chris was devastated. John told him, I can't do it. They hired Jerry Reese. They win 2 Super Bowls, but Chris was really devastated. So like 19 years later, he was in the shadows. And listen, he's deserved, like everybody else in that building, his share of criticism for 14 years of losing for the most part. And he consulted. He was part of the evaluation process. How big a part in later years, I don't know. But he was engaged, and so he deserves criticism for the record. Now, when his brother got sick and he had to step up, he just closed, to me, in my 40 years of covering sports in New York, the biggest deal, the biggest coaching hire the Giants have ever made. Without Chris Mara, I really don't think this gets done. And now you could say the same thing about Jackson Dart, okay? And if the Giants don't have Dart, this doesn't get done. But Chris Mara had to go to Baltimore and then go to Philly or Delaware for the 2 meetings that really convinced Harbaugh that we will give you what you need. We're going to get there. Now, this is even after they verbally agreed Wednesday night to become, basically to get married. So, but there were issues after that. And I wrote about that extensively the other day in The Athletic, that this got dicey in the last 48 hours because both sides didn't realize how tough it would be to get their verbal agreement into print and then agree to that. It just looks different in print. And so it almost went sideways to the extent where Brian Harlan, the agent for Harbaugh, was talking to the Titans on Saturday. So the deal closes around whatever it was, 2:30, and they're talking to the Titans. So what does that tell you? But I think Chris Mara's meeting Sunday in Baltimore at suburban Baltimore at Harbaugh's house, and then that second meeting on Friday just eased the coach's concerns enough to get him to hang in there, not take the visit with the Titans. They could have rescheduled that visit. They didn't. And finally get to a point where John Mara was comfortable saying, okay, you report directly to me and not to the GM, which is what we really want. And we'll give you enough control here inside the building so you can impact these other departments. And they had a deal.
Yeah. How has his role evolved and changed through the years? Because it was kind of noteworthy. I go down to the Senior Bowl every year in Mobile, Alabama, and, I got to you got a pretty good camera, and I love zooming in on kind of who's there and who's present in that Giants box. And I kind of see him, and it feels like the early years of Joe Schoen and Brian Dable. And I feel like that's when as Joe Schoen's hired, that is when Mara is getting grilled most on the nepotism and the family members that are present in the building. And that's when I feel like he kind of took a step back. And then the early part of this year, January of 2025 of this football season, that's where you start to see Mara kind of appear more and more present. Draft weekend as well. So is that kind of just a product of knowing his brother's health and knowing John Mara's health, and then he's becoming more of a face? And then also, is he going to be taking a larger role in the organization this year, kind of knowing that?
Just given my job as a general columnist, as I explained earlier, Justin, bouncing around between the different sports and teams in New York and beyond, I don't know if I'm the right person or the best person to ask that question. I'll tell you what I know. And also, Dan Duggan and Charlotte Carroll do a great job covering them every day for The Athletic.
Yeah.
Probably would have a better sense of it. But he did, you're right, early in the Schoen years, Chris did seem to me to be less engaged, less involved, less around. And then, yeah, I know for a fact after his brother got sick, because he told me, we were talking about, I occasionally would see Chris at the Masters. I've covered the Masters like 24 times, and he would be there occasionally. And I would ask him, "You going to the Masters?" And he said, "Not this year with my brother's health. I need to be around more." And I could see it on the road. He was the face of ownership at road games because John couldn't make the vast majority of those trips because of his health. So it really did feel like he was taking control of football operations, at least from an ownership standpoint, as John dealt with his treatments. And so, again, he was obviously in the spotlight here. And this was the biggest hire. They had to get this right after 4 swings and misses. I think it's bigger than hiring Coughlin because the Giants had been in the Super Bowl 4 years earlier. This was, I can't remember the last hire in New York, Parcells to the Jets, maybe.
Yep.
Pat Riley to the Knicks in the early 90s. That's how big this was. You have to go back 30 years plus.
Yep.
And for Chris Mara to be a point man in getting that done, I think it really helps him. I know his daughter, Kate, was there at the press conference yesterday. I thought I noticed on her face a little look of defiance, like her dad has taken a lot of grief over the years, and it was a really great moment for him. It was his day in the sun finally, and
I've never heard him spoke before, Ian.
Yeah,
never.
Right, and he's a good quote.
Very.
Sometimes he went on the record with me during the process. Like I was talking that one day where he told me that he had visited Harbaugh at his house. I didn't know that. I was talking to him. And it was almost like, oh, by the way, yeah, I went over to John's house on Sunday. I was like, you did?
Yeah.
And yeah, he explained it. He didn't want to talk too much about it. And I think after he said it, maybe he was like, well, I don't know if I should have said that. This was the day the Falcons made a big deal out of Matt Ryan's phone interview with Harbaugh. And some people weren't too happy about that. So I think Chris was trying to one up the Falcons a little bit there. He's denied that to me. But so he tells me the story, and he doesn't want to give too many details. But yeah, I was down at his house, and I said, okay, I've actually been to his house. So I say, do you mind if I report this? I mean, it was hard to know if he meant it off the record. And he goes, no, it's good. And I said, okay, like, do you want me to say a Giants official? Or he said, no, use my name. I said, okay. So right. I tweeted it. Chris Mara told The Athletic he was at John Harbaugh's house on Sunday for lunch and a meeting. And to me, that was the biggest development in the whole thing. He got out in front of everybody else. And think about it, Justin. John Harbaugh, who is the most coveted free agent in the entire cycle, never met with anybody else other than the Giants. So that was big.
What was the quote that he said? Like, I think when things were starting to maybe go a little bit of I wouldn't bet on that if I were you. That was kind of sick. Yeah. That was awesome.
Yeah, I told him, I said, man, if the guys are doing, it looks like you guys are in a good place in the search, but if the Packers fire LaFleur, you are cooked. And he said, I wouldn't bet on that if I were you. So they were confident. The Giants really thought, and listen, the Giants have been confident about a lot of things in recent years, and they haven't worked out, right? So this was one time where they caught the big fish and got him into the boat. And in a sense, now comes the hard part. And they were 4-13 last year, and they have been a bad football team for the better part of 14 years for a reason. And Harbaugh has been hired to come in and fix a lot of things. He told me right after he agreed to the deal on Saturday, I had him on the phone. On the record, he said, I expect to make the playoffs next year.
Yeah.
And that's after studying the Giants on tape. He saw enough there. He thinks that he can make the playoffs next season. No rebuilding. And I think Giants fans were happy to hear that.
100%. All right, before we keep going with Ian, I got to talk to you about HIMS because today's episode is sponsored by HIMS. ED is more common than you think and simpler to treat than ever. Through HIMS, you can connect online with a licensed provider to access personalized treatment options discreetly and on your terms. You shouldn't have to go out of your way to feel like yourself. HIMS brings expert care straight to you with 100% online access to personalized treatments that put your goals first. This isn't a one-size-fits-all care that forgets you in the waiting room. It's your health and goals put first with real medical providers making sure you get what you need to get results. To get simple online access to personalized, affordable care for ED, hair loss, weight loss, and more, visit hims.com/giants. That's hims.com/giants for your free online visit, hims.com/giants. Featured products include compounded drug products, which the FDA does not approve, verify, or for safety, effectiveness, or quality. Blah, blah, blah. Prescription requires see website for details, restrictions, and important safety information. Actual price will depend on products and subscription plan. Blah, blah, blah. Here's Ian O'Connor. I want to get to the crux of the 3-day waiting period in the period where we have a verbal agreement, and then we got to take these things down that we have a verbal agreement to, and then put them on paper. So I want to start off with the structure, both GM and head coach. And honestly, I think the second part of impacting the entire operation is way more complex than the reporting structure. GM and head coach, they're both directly reporting to John Mara. How is that different from how the Giants have operated in the past? And then even in your mind, what are the benefits of it? And what has Harbaugh told you what are the benefits of that kind of structure?
He's tried to downplay it because he doesn't like the narrative that he's coming in.
He did yesterday during the presser too. But I'm thinking you're downplaying it. It's I think people are making this a big deal. And I'm thinking to myself, didn't this take 3 days to fully figure it out? I think it's a big deal.
We're making it a big deal, John, because you made it a big deal. Okay.
Yeah.
But let's face it. It was his reporting structure in Baltimore, a very successful 18-year run. And you're a Hall of Fame coach, arguably right now. If not, he has some work to do, but he's getting close. Are you going to report to a GM who's been 13-38 the last 3 years? It doesn't make any sense. The GM who's on the last year of his deal, maybe he gets an extension, maybe not, who is, I think Joe Schoen is probably making between $4 and $5 million. And you have a $100 million plus coach coming in with a 5-year guarantee plus bonuses. And he's not going to report to a GM on the last year of his deal who's 13-38 in his last 3 years. It doesn't make any sense. And Joe Schoen realized that. I think Schoen was very good in this process. I think Joe realizes John Harbaugh might be the best thing that ever happened to him. He could sort of rehab his own image professionally. And 5 years from now, Joe Schoen might be considered one of the best executives in the NFL. So it makes sense. I think that why did it take 3 days to get to the finish line? I just think that after the verbal agreement of Wednesday night, so those reports were really largely accurate. They did agree to get married. Now it's just the verbal promises, assurances, agreements. When you see it in print, this is like any contract. I know when I do a book contract and I agree to things and I see the lawyer league language in the contract. A lot of times well, wait a second, that sounds a little more severe than I agreed to. So there was some of that. And really my understanding, and Chris Mara confirmed it yesterday, John Mara didn't ever officially agree to that report structure as far as the coach skipping the GM. It's like a skip pass in basketball and going right to ownership until Saturday, and I think that's why Brian Harlan, the agent, was talking to the Titans Saturday morning, because unless they got that, until John Mara said a definitive yes to that, they were not taking the Titans off the board. I think they almost regretted canceling that meeting with the Titans on Thursday. That would have been at John's house in the Baltimore area. And because it would have given them a little more leverage to maybe get what they wanted quicker. So Yeah, but it was, I'll say this too. So this was Friday night, 9:17 p.m. I texted Harbaugh and, it felt like things were getting a little dicey. You're seeing some reports, well, the structure issues are a problem and it should get worked out. Don't worry about it. But I was like, yeah, everyone around the league was talking about it. And one team called Brian Harlan and said, we'll fly our owner in right now. Because they all sensed that the Giants were having a problem closing this deal. And there were some vultures out there circling over these negotiations. And one executive called Harlan and said, I'll fly my owner in tomorrow with a 9-figure offer to get this thing done. So the Giants were playing with fire a little bit there as they tried to close this out. And finally, but I'm sorry. So I texted Harbaugh 9:17 Friday night. Hey, are you still confident you're going to be the head coach of the New York Football Giants or not? He responded with a shrug emoji. Mm-hmm. And I was like, nah, he's either just being dramatic, pulling my leg, or he means it. So to me, if his agent was still talking to the Titans Saturday morning, that tells me he meant it. And so it did get dicey, but ultimately, who cares now, right? It got to the finish line.
And based on not even I'm not even asked for specific conversation, but based on your relationship with Harbaugh, how you know the Mara family, how you know the Giants have operated, and then even just as an outsider, seeing how the Ravens have operated over the last 18 years, what do you feel like the benefits of this structure are? What are they?
Well, Brian Daboll's contract, Joe Schoen was all over that contract. And Schoen had the authority with everything. And so it's just a whole lot easier for a head coach with the track record of John Harbaugh to, if there was an issue and he didn't feel like Schoen was on board, to just go to John Mara and say, this is what I want to do. And Mara approves it. Okay, it's done. I just think, hey, listen, you could argue really in Baltimore, he should have reported directly. Ozzie Newsome's one of the greatest to ever do it. Yeah. I'm actually surprised that now maybe he was in the early years reporting to Ozzie. I don't know. But Newsome is one of the top 5 or 6 GMs of all time. And then DaCosta is one of the top 5 or 6 guys in the league right now. And he was reporting directly to ownership. So I think that, hey, it's almost amazing to look back at Bill Parcells, 2-time Super Bowl champ, Hall of Famer, Tom Coughlin, 2-time Super Bowl champ, future Hall of Famer, that they were reporting to general managers with the Giants. You're like, wow, that's interesting. I know the Harbaugh camp felt like, okay, if George Young or Ernie Accorsi were in place here, or Jerry Reese, maybe we wouldn't have pushed as hard as we did for this. But it is what John had in Baltimore.
Yep.
It's what he's comfortable with. And it's not George Young, and it's not Ernie Accorsi, and it's not Jerry Reese. It's Joe Schoen. No knock against him. This is his first job, and he's 13-38 in the last 3 years. And we're getting hired to fix these problems. It doesn't make any sense to report to him. I mean, I got to think even Joe Schoen on Truth Serum would say that. So that was a non-starter. I think if John Mara never came around on that, I don't think Harbaugh is the head coach of the Giants today. I don't.
Yeah. Now, in my opinion, and feel free to disagree with this, the most impactful words you have provided to us, and this is what gets me excited about Harbaugh, not just the structure, not just the fact that I know that he's going to be a good football coach, but Ian, I think there's a lot of things that need to go wrong inside a football building and inside a facility for things to be this bad, like it's been with the Giants. Like you mentioned the last 14 years, right? Forget just during the Joe Schoen era, the last 5. It's been a long, long time. And I'm going to read an excerpt from you. Harbaugh wanted the ability to impact the entire operation, from security to training to analytics to media relationships to size staff to assistant salaries to relocation expenses, you name it. And yes, in the unlikely event that there's a stalemate on draft day between Harbaugh and Schoen, there's no longer any questions who will prevail. So let's put Joe Schoen's involvement to the side, because I agree with that. And they're reporting to the same person. Harbaugh's salary, that money means power. Harbaugh's going to have the power there. But impacting the entire operation, knowing that there's been people that are in the medical side of things on the Giants building that have been there for a long time. People that have been there from the media side of things, media relations, PR, they've been there for a long time. Any kind of insight you have into the things that Harbaugh wants to do inside that building that is just outside of draft and free agency and then on the practice field?
So in this area, Justin, I can't tell you what's in the language in the contract. I don't have the contract.
Right.
So exactly how that's worded, I can't, and I didn't report that. And there's a reason why I wrote it the way I did. I think some of that is verbal assurance and some of it is in the contract. And Chris Mara is right. What he said yesterday at the presser, he said, Harbaugh doesn't have final say over everything in the building or else he couldn't do his job. We weren't doing that. So that is true. But he's been assured, some of it in writing, that he'll be able to, and he has and wants to bring in a number of people from the Ravens that he's very comfortable with. So, and I don't know specifically who those people are.
Right.
But let's say he wanted to bring in somebody on the medical side or the training side or whatever. He's going to have the power to do that. And I think what will happen, and this I think is a natural or organic part of the process with really any organization bringing in a power coach like this, is he needs to have a lot of conversations with people. And that's already started with Chris Mara about, okay, some of the people already in place, people who've been there forever. Okay, what do they do? How do we feel about these people? What's the temperature in the building about so-and-so? I don't want to start mentioning names. It's irresponsible.
Right.
But he does want to bring in a number of people from the Ravens, coaches and also staffers and department heads. And so there could be a conflict, not a conflict, but he might have somebody, I need this person in my organization. This person, he or she, was a big part of my 18 years of winning. And if there's somebody who's been here 19 years, well, can we move that person into a different role? And if not, well, I need to make this replacement because I need this person. I think he will have the power to do that.
Right.
And again, I don't have the language or the contract to tell you that he's got control over this department, but not this one. But I think some of those discussions made it tricky in the end. It wasn't just direct report to John Mara. It was also, okay, how much control do I have over other departments in the building? Who is reporting to me?
Yeah.
And I think that got a little dicey. It wasn't just, I am not reporting to Joe Schoen. It was, okay, we got a big football operation going here. I need to know, all right, what's going on here with training, medical, media relations, security team, analytics, everything. It's just, it's John's coming in with a plan on how to run the entire operation, understanding he doesn't have complete control over it, but certainly has a lot of influence in how things are going to change going forward.
Yeah, I can't even comprehend. I've never been inside a building. I've never, from a day-to-day basis or even just for one day. I was in the Giants locker room for the Heart of a Giant event a couple years ago. And I did go around inside. I'm like, this is it. This is the Giants locker room, which I'm happy to hear that it is getting I think it's getting a little bit of an upgrade, a little bit of facelift along with some other facilities there, which I think is cool. I think that should happen, especially if it'll attract free agents and players and things like that. But I can only imagine just how much goes into a building. Like, it's shocking. Like, think this is a $10 billion business. It's not just, all right, who are we going to draft and who are we going to sign in free agency? Like, there's so much more. And I really do think of any successful working environment, having the right people in place that all get along and are on the same page, they're on the same basis, same level playing field, that we know the goal, we know what we're going to do here, we have a community, all these things I think are so essential to a building thriving. Again, not just, are we going to draft the right players and are we going to sign the right players in free agency? And if I had to guess, instead of just the power structure that, it took 3 days, I would have to presume that was also a main holdup in this and a main thing for Harbaugh to say, I want to implement this my way and the way that's been successful in Baltimore for the last 18 years. Yeah,
and I don't know this to be the case, but let's say Harbaugh in Baltimore had someone who was the head of the maintenance staff, and he loved this person. This person made the daily experience inside the building better because he or she was great at that job. Yeah. And I'm going to give that person a raise and bring that person to New Jersey with me. And we're going to do the same thing here. And so, those are the things. And it sounds like, well, that's not a major part of a winning football operation. Who says who, right?
Right.
And maybe I have a chef who did an unbelievable job feeding my players the right way, the winning way in Baltimore. And this chef has to come with me. Okay, it's just things like that you don't even think about. If you're a fan, you're just thinking about the quarterback and we need some playmakers and we need some help in the secondary and some linebackers here. Offensive line still needs some work, and you're not thinking about things like that. But Harbaugh knows that every freaking day matters. The Belichick way in New England was treating every single day on the calendar in the offseason, preseason, regular season, postseason, you name it, like it was Game 7 of the World Series. That's the only way to build a winning organization. So that means that things like the maintenance staff, the cafeteria staff, the chef, the head trainer, the whatever, that all matters to the nth degree. And if you don't look at it that way, you're not going to win in the NFL.
I love it. All right, so we'll kind of end off with this. So I think we have an idea of where does Joe Schoen fit into all this, but I will kind of ask you it anyway. Where does Joe Schoen fit into all this? And I said on the show kind of last week about I do not think that Harbaugh is going to want to work with a yes man. And then lo and behold, one of the headlines of Dan Duggan wrote an article today saying that basically Harbaugh does not want to just work with the yes man. Where does he kind of fit in all this?
Well, I know that Harbaugh liked him in the process, and right after I think he met with him for the first time, he at least had a number of phone conversations with him. And I asked him, I said, how do you feel about Joe Schoen? He said, I really like him. I think I can definitely work with this guy. I said, okay, sounds good to me. And I think Schoen will try to form a partnership with him, understanding that if there is a stalemate, they'll side with the coach. But it's not like in the war room on draft night, and here's pick number 5, they're going to be at a stalemate at that point. Right. They would have already worked that out. They have months now to talk, debate, engage in healthy debate, and come to a consensus on who they want to be there at number 5, right? So the chances of that happening on draft night are not nil, but it's unlikely.
Right.
So he understands that, hey, you look around the league and Ryan Poles in Chicago and Elliott Wolf in New England, and you look at Jacksonville, and sometimes if you're an executive, it makes a lot of sense to take a step back, allow this organically to be more of a coach-driven organization, particularly when you have a really good coach like Mike Vrabel. And I can benefit from this. All of a sudden, my reputation is going to be enhanced. And around the league right now, or even just with the fan base, Joe Schoen is not a popular guy. And so he can become very popular, right? If within 3 years, if the Giants have another Lombardi trophy, nobody is going to be complaining about Joe Schoen.
Nope.
Right?
Nope.
So this could be the best thing that ever happened to him. He's brought in, and he was part of the process, and an important one, particularly early on, when he established that early contact, and he did establish a rapport with Harbaugh. That was important. And he realized, okay, I'm going to lose some juice here. But by losing some juice, I might save my career long term, make a lot of money off this. Not that I'm saying he's about money, but that's the practical reality of it.
Right.
And so he did a good job. And Harbaugh is a collaborative guy. And so I think he will definitely try to make it work. And I would say that I'm certainly not one to give a football executive advice on how to run a team, but it does make sense since Harbaugh is a guy like Belichick who doesn't want yes men around. Don't be afraid if you feel strongly about something to challenge him on it, but just be ready to defend your position. That was a Belichick thing. Challenge me, but do your homework and defend your position.
Yeah. And I think even though the results were not great, obviously, but I do think Shane's strongest point is that he collaborated with Brian Daboll really, really well. And I can imagine, and through certain context clues as the years have gone on, none of them being more significant and more documented than the whole Jackson Dart pick of, Joe Schoen in that draft room, video evidence of like, all right, Dabes, we're going with your guy here. And that may have not necessarily been his guy, or he would have preferred to do something else, right? I think that might have been Shane's biggest selling point to Harbaugh is that, despite the results, at least what I was able to do is collaborate with this coach and kind of build a team, build at least an offense around his vision, and then execute it enough to somebody like you, Harbaugh, really likes the tape and likes what's going on here.
And let's face it, the Giants should have been 7-10 this year, and then maybe Dable's still around. They couldn't close out games. They really should have won 7 games, and maybe 8. But anyway, they might be better off that that didn't happen, because now you have John Harbaugh as your head coach, and that's a good thing. But I think the Shane Dart thing was curious to me because, it was pretty clear that Dable liked him at least a little more, if not a lot more, than the GM did. But the GM listened to his head coach. He's like, okay, you really want this and believe in this quarterback. Okay, I don't maybe believe in him as much as you do, but I'll trade up and get him for you. I thought that was a positive. If I'm John Harbaugh and I'm looking at that, I'm like, hey, if he listened to Dable, he's certainly going to listen to me.
Right.
And if I push for a player, I think he'll work with me on it. And he did that with Brian Dable. He got him his quarterback. And if he didn't do that, John Harbaugh wouldn't be the head coach today. So it kind of worked out at the end of the process, certainly.
All right, Ian, is there anything that you're working on that you have coming up that you want kind of everybody that we got listening to tune in, and we're gonna ride or die with you, certainly, whatever happens. So thank you very much for coming on. What do you got?
Well, I don't know. I tweeted out the other day, if I wrote a book about that 5-year period from 07 through 11, would you be interested? Mm-hmm. Right. And the 08 team fascinates me too, because Coughlin told me that team was going to win it all. He never says things like that.
Everybody says they were going to win. I mean, fans say it, but every single player that I've heard talk about it, they said we were going to do it.
Yeah. It's amazing that in that period, the best team the Giants had didn't win it. So I think that I'm thinking my next book, I've written 7. I've been fortunate enough to have 6 of them on the New York Times bestseller list. So I'd like to make this the next one. But is there enough interest in a book like that on that 5-year period? And so that's a possibility that's coming down the road. But my books are on Amazon.com if anyone's interested. On Twitter, I'm at Ian_O'Connor, no apostrophe necessary.
We're going to put the Amazon link in the description of the show so you can check it out there. Ian O'Connor, thank you once again for coming on. We'll do this again soon.
My pleasure, Justin. Thank you.
All right. Thank you again to Ian O'Connor for coming on. Make sure you go thank him in the tweet that I promote the episode on. I really do appreciate him making time. We will be back next week talking about more, I guess, OC/DC candidates. Schoen, if you're not getting the gist of the offseason schedule, I think Schoen is going to be the guy that you're going to hear early in the week. And then in the back end of the week, I'm typically going to have some sort of guest on. If there's any case of breaking news, then Schoen may be on twice a week, or depending if I can't get a guest, then maybe you'll hear Schoen twice a week too. So that's the offseason schedule. Hopefully I'm in Mobile, Alabama on Monday afternoon, evening. Hopefully I am, but there's going to be a bad snowstorm in the East Coast that may disrupt my travel plans. Hopefully it doesn't. Hopefully everything's fine and it works out. So next time you'll hear from me, I will be in Mobile, Alabama, and then you'll hear Schoen. And then in the back end of the week, we'll have a guest and we'll talk Senior Bowl and some other stuff too as the Giants start to fill out their staff. All right, let's go Giants. Thanks for listening.
It starts today. Let's go Giants! We woo!